Thank you, Dr. Sano, and I'm so happy to be here at this really important gathering with all of you. And my presentation can start now. Hello, everyone. I'm Lynn Sures, an artist working in handmade paper. It is an honor to speak to you today about hand paper making in the arts, and I thank the committee for its kind invitation. Of the many artists who use handmade paper, I will present a selection of very diverse artists and their motivations. Some artists' studio practices reveal an overarching interest in exploration of the properties of paper itself. Dutch artist Peter Gentinar says, "My inspiration is a plant bud, which in spring unfolds into a leaf. A compact folded form turns into a great spacious form. In autumn, this leaf falls, the water evaporates, and a small web of fibers curling around the spine is the new form." Allowing freedom to the material is his objective. Thin bamboo sticks are used to build a frame. Covered with pulp, vacuumed until strong enough to be picked up and formed into a three-dimensional shape. The paper will shrink about 30% depending on the beating process. The bamboo, unable to shrink, spirals from the tension between the two materials. He builds and sells his own beaters. Uniquely, a Dutch city commissioned of him 2 4-meter-high paper sculptures, which were then cast in bronze for a bridge. To generate more attention for the possibilities of paper art, Peter organized a Holland Paper Biennial in 1996, which continues today. Italian-American Roberto Mannino says, "I am fascinated by the expressive potential of the paper-making techniques and their inner phenomena. I intend to use paper as a live, expressive tool in a multiplicity of formats, merging it with other disciplines. In the graphite suites, I used the paper-making process as a tool to model and alter the outer skin of objects. In Carte Armate, he has again used graphite, wax, and burnishing to create a sense of shined metal, saying, "I was trying to make papers that could be seen as a metal relief, controlling their shrinkage to exalt the inner rhythm of the linear structure." We can see that transformation. About his Le Vestite series, Roberto says, "I used a watermark of a structural female dress to suggest a feminine presence. Then I played with various watery effects to create a mystical and magical presence. The suite was displayed on a glass wall, allowing for perceiving multiple results according to which light source was on from the front and from behind." Chinese-American artist Hong Hong pours colored paper pulp onto screens in water. She says, "The exterior pores stage collisions between primordial forces. Soil, like newly formed paper, is a flexible body, whereas the sky seems to be a closed corridor between the known, Earth, and the unknown, the universe." She notes each project begins with the inner bark of a mulberry tree, cooked with ash and hand-beaten using mallets, mixed with dyes and water to form pulp. Poured in successive layers and dried beneath the sun, pulp becomes paper. These materials remain vulnerable to environmental variables as they cure, giving form to fluctuations within their surroundings. She continues, "The surface of the paper is a space where the sky, weather, the marrow of trees, and my own hands can momentarily touch and intersect. Any object that directly depends on the spinning of the earth to fully form contains some version of truth. Victoria Rabal of Barcelona, Spain, is both an artist and master paper maker, and the director of the Paper Mill Museum of Capellades. Her works demonstrate a reverence and curiosity for the paper itself. She manipulates with paper. In this case, she can use the fisherman's net to interact with the surface of the paper. Zhangzi's quote, "Between strength and softness, escape and capture, the mind proposes, hands find, and matter responds," led Victoria to this series. She says, "I transgress the orthodoxy of the craft, bring to the limit the tensions of the fibers. The cracks and shapes are the response to the tension that my hands have insinuated, like physical presence through which to escape." Victoria's atlas of 70 different species was made using the Japanese Gyotaku technique, prints made through direct contact with the body of the animal, revealing its primitive essence through its own imprint. Chinese ink covers the fish. It is printed on paper made by master paper makers from Aoya, Japan. At Barcelona's Central Fish Market in the early morning, she publicly created the prints. Japanese artist and designer Kyoko Ibe has worked with her company of collaborators, writer Elise Theron, paper maker Tamura-san, and a cast of Japanese and American performers since 2009. Kyoko is the set and costume designer, responsible for the dazzling environment of the stage in which the washi tales unfold, and for the garments of the performers. Kyoko has a vast experience in designing sets for theater and performance in many countries, beginning in 1982. She has acute awareness of the impact of light on paper, of the interaction between the paper set and an actor or dancer, and of the power and effect of a paper costume on the movement of the human body in performance. Kyoko says, "When I work in the space, I want to make the invisible power or energy of the space visible by installing my works made of paper. The space looks empty, but actually it is not. Light and wind are the signs of the energy of the space, and by installing paper pieces, we can feel and see that. We feel we are connected to the space with the installation. Washi is developed to be used related to the light." Many contemporary artists create work propelled by convictions about today's cultural crises, with an imperative of attaining social justice for all members of society. Drew Cameron explains he began his career in hand paper making through interactive workshops for veterans and the community after his time in the U.S. Army as a field artillery soldier serving in the Iraq War in 2003. Describing his work as combat paper, it is the process of rendering military uniforms into handmade paper, creating prints, objects, and events with donated materials from service members. Drew has led many workshops with and for members of the armed services, bringing a creative and thoughtful endeavor to people wanting to express themselves through the arts of papermaking, writing, drawing, painting, and printmaking. Combat paper serves these Americans, listening to and truly seeing those who have served their country as they process their experiences. He says, making handmade paper from military uniforms is a pursuit of meaning and a subversion of material. The uniform represents in part human energy expended towards warfare, both personal and collective. Altering the purpose of the uniform into paper allows me to access the biographical aspects of clothing and gesture to the possibility of purpose beyond our current cultural paradigm of war. Iranian Sanaz Haghani says the secondary status of women in Iran results in unreported crimes. Where does the fear that causes such silence come from? Why do these problems continue to be denied or ignored? The female figure is familiar and unknown at the same time in the chador, the all-encompassing black cloth Iranian women wear to disguise their figures and hide their body. She says, I visualize the stories of women's lives, an image that penetrates the viewer's mind. Chador is associated with the Islamic practice of hijab, to hide from view or conceal. Hijab represents 3,000 years of history through different shapes and colors, while black is now the way women wear it. With the hijab, I try to invoke the grander ideals of the veil. Sanaz tells us, I collect personal objects to use as fiber for the paper or to embed, to add something that had been used by someone I was referencing, to convey both being and not being seen, to reach an invisible presence. These muted visualizations are a sign of my denied gender. I attempt to break that eternal stillness and transform that habituation to vague, involuntary forms. Preston Sampson explains, the theme of his new project is All Together Now, celebrating the opening up of society after the long isolation under COVID restrictions. We see ourselves coming back together after a long hiatus. The circles represent the personal space that we were confined in. Collage elements are included in many of the pulp paintings. He has worked in this descriptive and expressive manner of pulp painting since the 1990s, always with technical collaborators. Homeboy Ralph shows us the look and demeanor of a colorful member of the LGBTQ community in Preston's hometown of West Palm Beach, Florida. In Hot Time, he tells us he is painting hotter than July. Color and line set the temperature. He worked with Ellen Hill at Reading Road Studio to create this celebratory series of pulp paintings with guidance from Helen Frederick. Crediting Jimi Hendrix for his title, Preston says of the Joker, after a long absence, we were able to share a bench. Of Princessa, he notes, hopeful beauty adorned with laurel and hoops of gold. Melissa Potter says, plant protection is an image of me wearing my work archive. She describes the spinning paper project as inspired by traditional costume of the Balkans, in which women wear headdresses embroidered with symbol systems of protection and power, often featuring plants. She notes, this technique connects me to my interest in ancient domestic practices by women. Mal says, Touchetti rugs were inspired by my research with ethnographer Robert Chensener during my Craft Power project in Republic of Georgia. We collaborated with women felt artisans. He taught me about the symbols of the work, from ancient Zoroastrian cults celebrating and worshiping women and the earth. She explains, Sex Work is based on the Hull House wage maps conducted in the South Loop of Chicago, which included more than 65 brothels in proximity to today's Papermakers Garden at Columbia College, Chicago. Pages are records of material grown on that site. The historic Hull House for Social Work intersects with Mary Blood, founder of Columbia College, where Mel teaches. Caledonia Curry is swoon. In her bio, the first woman to gain large-scale recognition in the world of street art, pasting her paper portraits to the sides of buildings to make art and the public space of the city more accessible. She weaves in fairy tale, myth, and a recurring motif of the sacred feminine. Her own family history and a legacy of her parents' struggles with addiction and substance abuse recur throughout her work. Swoon, working alongside a master paper maker, says, I can use colored fibers and create stencil-like images, trap almost any kind of collage material in the substrate, and layer in my silkscreen portraits, taking ancient technology and these techniques that people have been developing for thousands of years and bringing them together with my own remnants of modern life. She asks, who are we when we drop our guard down and let ourselves be seen? Who do we become when we work together to overcome a crisis? I work across various mediums, long-term social practice projects. My focus is on the transformative potential inherent in the creative process itself. Each project becomes a means of interconnection and a way of seeing each other anew. Science, nature, and technology coexist delicately in today's world, and many artists are involved in the global discourse. Helen Frederick explains, the Anthropocene is a huge paradox, infinite potential challenged by decline, social media creating massive incertitudes. Language of silence sits opposite times of violence. A lineage of materiality guides us in our 21st century lives and binds us in a larger evolutionary process. I am grounded by the labor of the hand for the making of objects. Helen says, to survive, we breathe. To touch, our fingertips reach out. When pierced, our blood comes through our skin. When bathing water absorbs into us. When a drone targets a site, the dots on the radar screen overlay the image. When bombs drop, the earth is burnt, scarred, and opened. When dreams quicken, we feel the urgency. Escape, through the holes, push through the apertures. She continues, words received from participants about milestones for hope are embedded, printed, or wrapped around the ellipses in the shape of a satellite disk that receives information. The sequence illustrates oil spills, water desecration, and social danger. The ellipse is the power of sound and silence. I have wrapped each milestone with words to offer healing, data from words collected from many voices. Nancy Cohen says, waterways and other comprised environments are almost human in their balance of fragility and strength, the way they persevere through adversity, much of it inflicted by us. The drawings are constructed in a quilt-like fashion. I draw on the surfaces with paper pulp. Elements hang in the balance, each one necessary, vulnerable, beautiful, and interdependent. She describes a few steps from the shopping center, a quiet space where pools of flat, still water gave way to the tops of wooden tree stumps. This used to be a cedar forest, intentionally destroyed hundreds of years ago. The stumps seemingly emerged from the water, surreal, beautiful, majestic in their survival, and sad. Water has overtaken them, but they remain as monuments to their history. Words from critic Dominique Nahas. Complex cleansing systems, estuaries support and replenish a wide variety of marine as well as terrestrial life. In addition, atmospheric conditions relating to ocean currents and wind formations are tied into these organic regulatory and filtering structures. Estuary evokes the fragile balance and power of nature. Joan Hall's work addresses her passion for marine advocacy. She says of this work, Composed of cast paper sailing blocks, plastic detritus, and glass pins, the floor-to-ceiling wave recalls Hokusai's print, The Great Wave off Kanagawa. But instead of fishermen, a mound of plastic detritus, a product of commerce, rolls into view. Yet the sailing blocks reference a positive outlook towards the future. Joan says, water pollution is a core concern, and my intent is to initiate a conversation and awareness about the deterioration of our greatest resource, water. Algae bloom is a metaphor blending red tide algae bloom and the algae bloom that was green, the Olympic blob in China in 2008. It is meant to symbolize a global problem, east to west. She continues, my art addresses the crisis of today, changing climates and changing chemistry in the world. This work was motivated by my concern over the health of the coral reefs and the ghost fishing of plastic nets in the ocean. The healthy blue-green of the water blends into the browns of dying coral reefs. My work uses beauty to conceal ecological trouble. Michelle Samore, in 2011, created translucent pulp drawings of viruses floating within a reflecting pool light box, like a microscopic slide. She notes that the piece was influenced by control of the spread of disease, of information, vaccines, and the political, social, and economic factors that surround viruses. Seemingly beautiful viruses have the potential to do enormous harm. Michelle asks, how we organize our thoughts and ideas, categorize, and create systems. Here, plant fiber creates an organic, translucent, and transitory context for investigating the relationship between science, technology, and the natural world. The circle is the all-knowing eye, the eye of the telescope and microscope, and the physiological eye, our first lens to the visual world. She notes that clusters of cells reference neurons, viruses, internet communications, as the organic becomes overlaid and interchangeable with the technological. This work is a reflection on the intersections of science and faith in the 21st century, asking how they coexist. For thousands of years, the eye of God has been used as a potent symbol in both our spiritual and lay worlds. Megan Singleton collects plant fibers and river sediment. She says to embed elements of regional specificity and conceptual implications into the work. This work reflects navigating and researching the coastal landscape, aquaculture, and aquatic plant ecology in Maine. The sheer force and energy of 18 feet of water coming in and out of Passamaquoddy Bay every day was astounding. She continues, the currents were wild, a sea of confusion. The water rippled and flowed in a myriad of directions. The landscape was constantly changing, the coastal rocks draped in carpets of dense black rockweed. Old Sow is one of the largest whirlpools in North America. Similarly, Megan describes Louisiana Manchac Swamp. Invasive plants overwhelm native plants in the Louisiana bayous. I learned the patterns of radial lines through the marsh were dredged canals, and the saltwater intrusion prohibits the growth of native cypress saplings planted in restoration efforts. My paper is made from a plant with its own history of destructive beauty, the water hyacinth. I'll close with images from my own artistic practice. In Spain, from a car window, I first saw Montserrat, a gigantic, imposing, animated presence, a thing to be reckoned with. I stared without speaking so it would live in my head. So in a studio far from home, I began my intense relationship with this mountain, making large pulp paintings imbued with it. At Olorgesailie, Kenya, I camped and drew excavation sites with evidence of early human presence. This mountain was a habitat where our ancient ancestors lived. They feel alive as I work on such portraits of our past, in its complex ecological interdependencies. I look for points of convergence on the continuum between our early African ancestors and our own human identity. My hands forged the steel, made paper, and pulp-painted prints, and sewed the bindings. But my mind studied physics texts to learn how aspects of the universe fit together. Science finds that time is not independent from space. Everything is in motion in these sculpted books. Each time opened, the pages of crackly hemp paper create new waves and sounds. Thank you for your interest in the creative and contemplative practices of some contemporary artists working in handmade paper.